Okay? And what I mean by that is, how you debate a theory argument is not going to change my defaults on theory. Right? That doesn't mean that I'm going to vote a certain way on theory. Right? It doesn't mean that you should treat theory like a crusade. Okay? I think sometimes people treat theory debates like, I am going to convert everyone in this room to my view of theory. Right? You know, if I can prove, you know, conditional counterplans are a sin, okay, you know, then, you know, you're going to join my side, and we're going to kill, like the Crusaders did, everyone who runs this argument, right? And you're going to leave the room, you know, like Abraham Lincoln, vampire hunter, looking for, you know, people that run, you know, consult counterplans and conditional counterplans, you know, those kind of things, right? And I think we think that sometimes, right? Because most judges want to avoid theory debates like the plague. Okay, most people want to avoid a theory debate like the plague, right? Because you don't really want to look somebody in the eye and say you're a dirty cheater, right? Or what you've done is not good for the game, right? Or how you crafted that argument is not good for the game, right? It meant one side couldn't win over another side. It meant we didn't learn as much, right? And so, you know, you don't really like to do that unless it's deserving. You know, and sometimes it is, right? And that's the debates that, you know, people actually win theory arguments on. Here's just a couple of quick little things. I'm not going to highlight all of these because, you know, you should, when you write your theory blocks, you know, think about like when they're getting used. You know, one of the things that I'm going to talk about, and one of, you know, my big things is I talk about micro moments in debate, right? Most debates are won or lost, usually with about between 1.5 to 2 minutes of some micro moment in the debate. It occurs on one particular flow. It's a special, you know, impact comparison. It's a particularly, you know, good, you know, set of cards. You know, there's some micro moment, right? And if you took that moment out and said, how was that moment debated in all 8 of the speeches, you could really get a sense of why one side won or lost. And theory arguments are like that. You know, I always joke that, you know, theory arguments are like what it must have been like to be Caesar. Okay? And here's what I mean by that. Think about a theory argument, for instance. You know, most theory arguments are initiated by the second affirmative, right? Against something the negative does. You know, every once in a while you'll get the, you know, the 1NC will do, you know, some framework or topicality or, you know, a plan flaw or something, right? But most theory arguments are started in the second affirmative, and they're usually about what? Like, you know, 15, 20 seconds, you know? International fiat's illegitimate, you know, we'd have to be able to read in every country in the world. There's an infinite number of countries, 190 some odd countries, et cetera, voting issues for fairness, right? Quick little 15 seconds, right? That was that first night. You know, when, you know, the first senator came up, you know, and Caesar's up there all talking and everything, and, you know, that first person runs up and, you know, stabs Caesar in the side, and Caesar's like, hey, what the hell's going on? You know, got a speech to give here, right? What are you doing, right? And that's what you feel like on the negative, right? You know, the 2AC is just like, international fiat, illegitimate, competitive equity, education, fair footage, right? And you're like, hey, I got a speech to give here, what's going on? You know, a little, you know, somebody's, you know, stabbed me a little bit here. You know, no big whoop, flesh wound. You know, I got my red cape on, I'm fine. Can't even see it. Okay. You know, and so then all of a sudden, right, you know, then the negative, you know, the negative's like, hey, we're not dirty cheaters, and this is all fine, and vote against the argument, not the team, you know, and you're like, okay, whew, flesh wound, you know. And then the 1AR comes up, right, then all of a sudden, you know, that first senator had some patents, you know, damn it, you know. There was like wave 2 of, you know, poor Caesar, you know, poor Caesar had to face wave 2 at that point, right, that's the 1AR, all of a sudden, right, here comes, you know, the next wave. Right, and the 1AR spent, you know, minute and a half, 2 minutes, 2.5. You know, it depends how much, you know, how many other senators, you know, Caesar needed in wave 2. Okay? Right? And so, you know, then you can get that feeling, right? The negs, you know, feeling like Caesar. Right? All of a sudden here comes 1AR, wave 2, you know, and all those blocks, you know, all those answers come, etc. Right? Minute, 2 minute. That sort of thing, you know, and all of a sudden that flesh wound's like, all right, this is tiring me out a little bit here. I'm not sure I can give the rest of this speech here. You know, Caesar's starting to feel a little wounded. All of a sudden the 1AR spent a minute, 2 minutes, those things. Well, think about the blocks that you need for that, right? As that little micro moment progresses, right? The 2AC needs that 15, 20 second, really well crafted, word efficient, right? That gives you those nuggets that can explode into that 1AR, right? You want all the little pieces of you're a damn dirty cheater, and here comes my second wave of stabbings, right? You want all those nuggets to have been in that first, to be part of that first knife, right? All the poison, right? You want more of that same poison, right? So if you got 4 or 5 little warrants, right, that you think you can explode, you want them in that efficient, first wave, right? So that then all of a sudden it can be like, and you're writing answer-to-answer blocks against, the Caesar going flesh wound, no big whoop, and that's the negative block, right, against that, right, their little first wave, right? So that's a different kind of block that you might do, for other kinds of arguments, right? Because it has to be designed with small amounts of time in mind, right? It has to be designed with particular speeches in mind, right? The majority of theory debates start with that tiny flesh wound in the 2AC, right? And then the 1AR, 2NR, 2ARs, right, are really where, the meat comes. Well, those aren't speeches that you usually traditionally write a lot of blocks for, right? And so when you write your blocks, right, because then, right, the 1AR, that wave 2, poor Caesar's like, meat, now all of a sudden 2.5 of the 2NR, right, is fending off theory, right? You barely win your strategy, maybe, right? Mostly you're fending off theory, right? And then all of a sudden, the 2AR stands up and has the choice, right? Put you away by not going for theory because you haven't spent enough time on the substance, right? Or et2 theory, right? Put you away with the theory, right? Like Brutus, right? And down you go, right? And you walk out of the room going, God, conditionality bad, really? Picks bad, really? Really? In 2012, picks are bad, really? Right? When those debates happen, like I feel ripples in the force. Right? I can tell you when people lose on like conditionality bad and picks bad in like other parts of the country. Right? It just pains me. If you've ever read my judging philosophy, you know why. Right? Right? But, I get a little whoop, I get a little bounce in the force, right, when people lose on like multiple conditional frameworks bad. Right? Or when they lose on conditional picks bad or the dispositional pick bad. Right? Because I can't straight turn it anymore. Conditional pick, I can't straight turn. You just said that was my one way of, dealing with, that particular argument or something, And so, again, I think you got to think about, what kinds of arguments. Cut cards for your theory arguments. Right? A lot of them come from the court, Congress, international relations, those things, or the topic, right? Cut cards about, like, especially like normal means and those things, right? Read judging philosophies. Oh my God. Right? For all of you that are, dirty cheating plagiarists and stuff and want an easy way to write theory blocks, you should go to the Judging Philosophy Wiki, type in whatever argument you're wanting to write a theory block for, and you should steal phrases from people's judging philosophies when they rant about these arguments. You could put the death knell to consult and condition counterplans by just reading people's judging philosophies. Right? They have some of the most pointed and efficiently worded, reasons why they hate these things. I know that my teams in particular have won debates on the solvency advocate rhetoric, right, that we have taken from people's judging philosophies and put into our theory blocks about a solvency advocate for a counterplan, for counterplans in particular, about what's the standard, right? We went to 3 different judging philosophies of people that judge us a lot, and we noticed that was like, damn, right? We keep winning on these arguments in front of these people. Why don't we just take these lines, from their philosophy? Okay, so use those things, right? Hey, go back to those old journals, right? There are articles on counterplans and permutations and those kind of things, right? Not that you would read those cards necessarily, but it gives you, some really good stuff. And then have theory mini things. And the next slide, I have an example of what I mean by that, right? Take my Brutus example, and you can create a theory mini debate, especially, you guys that are having these like theory groups here over the next few days or whatever, or if you're ever looking for something to do with your team and you have a very small amount of time, you have an hour after school, you can't do a whole practice debate or a 45-minute class or something. Well, you could take a theory issue, right? And if you take that micro moment, say I'm going to carve out, right, the amount of time I spend on that theory argument in a debate, and we're going to have a practice round using that, right? So we're going to do conditionality, good, bad, or international fiat, good, bad, right? You can see that if you, give the 2AC 45 seconds would be way too long. That's the block the 2AC wants to read. They're like, I'll show you international fiat bad. I got like this 10-point block. Yeah, when are you ever reading that in the 2AC, right? And so, and then, the negative block spikes back, usually a minute or so, right? And those we just talked about, right? A minute of the 1AR, a minute to 2.5 of the 1AR, right? Maybe half of the 2NR, you still got to win the rest of your strategy. And then, the 2AR gets the all-in or, part in, sort of option. But that's a great way, I bet you, when I've done labs and skills groups and on my own team and those kind of things, I bet you I've witnessed 100 of these little theory minis, and it's such a great way to, you create a little scenario here with the arguments, right? So you have a specific context of, what issue you're defending, and then you can, take this. We already talked about this. Make sure to write your own theory arguments. Theory shouldn't be top down. It should be bottom up. It's kind of like training wheels. If you needed training wheels when you first learned how to ride a bike, and then once you got good at it, you didn't need the training wheels anymore. Theory should be a lot like that. You should write your own blocks until you don't need them anymore, right? Especially the 2ACs. You should have in your mind, if you're the 2AC, you should know, and you should almost pick. Here are 5 theory arguments that I feel comfortable like staking a debate on if somebody does, these things, right? And you might pick, multiple conditional frameworks. That's my favorite. The 2 counterplans, the 2 Ks, the SQUO, or the one counterplan with multiple planks. Have you ever? I hope all of you are using your math classes against the multi-plank counterplans, right? It's called factorially or whatever. If somebody has a 5-plank counterplan, they have 5 planks in their counterplan, a whole bunch of advantage counterplans, so they have like 5 different things they're doing in their counterplan, but they put all in one counterplan. And you ask them in the cross-sex, can they defend any one of the planks or any combination of, and they're like, oh yeah, if this one solves your advantage, then yeah, we can defend that one. Well, you know how many actual combinations that is, right? It's 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. Gives you the number of actual counterplane combinations that is, right? And that's a lot. What's that, like 120? Right, that's 120. Right, so the negative answers the multi-plank counterplan with a simple yes, we can defend any one of the planks or any combination of, then really what they're saying to the judge is we've presented 120 potential counterplans. Okay? Well, you don't even have enough time in the 2AC to make all those perms. Right? How do you perm every one of those counterplans in the 2AC? Against combination 1, do both, and do the counterplan and the plan. Against combination number 2, do both, it's like, how do you you can't, so you may need some theory for that, right? And certainly use your math, and then tell your math teacher that you use math to, right? Like I was saying, use the continuums when you're creating your arguments, right? Think about what do they push you to. When somebody is doing 50-state fiat, and you're like, hey, I think 50-state fiat is illegitimate, why is that? Well, maybe because the 50 states have never all acted together at once before. Okay, well then it means it ignores political realities, which on the fiat continuum, if you ignore political realities, then what's the whole point of fiat? Because the whole point of fiat is to have a political discussion. Potentially, if somebody, you can have like, well, you can make an argument that like theory trib or theory, like somebody is trivializing a theory argument or they're over theorizing or those kind of things. So, no, because then that becomes similar to like a reverse voting issue, and woo, that's another one of those like pet peeves. Like, congratulations, you were topical. Oh wait, that means you should win or lose. I'm not quite sure. oh, you cannot, what? Never understood that, reverse voting part. But that would be more like that. Make sure to know normal means for your plan and have a defensive framework, right? Especially in 2012. It just shocks me, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in the second half when we're talking about fiat or whatever. It shocks me when people walk into the framework buzzsaw. It's like, what, you forgot you were aft, right? And you were going to have to defend like something related to like framework, right? It's like, the neg's like, oh, prioritize our, critique alternative as, part of our framework. And the app's like, oh man, I never thought they were going to say discourse. I never thought they were going to say like ontology, right? Or, whatever, right? I never thought they were going to say privileged something, right? And so, what? You were like, I never thought I was going to have to say privileged something. Well, we live, that's the society we live in. Everybody wants to privilege something. But the idea of having a defense of the topic, right? One of the things that I love to do in the summer when a new topic comes out is I like to cut cards that are just like the value of the topic. Like, why are people saying, infrastructure good, those kinds of things, right? Because those give you like K offense on the app of things that you can, sort of defend, or they give you like normal means for your plan, right? I fear for the state counter plan against a lot of apps because I've never seen such a cooperative like literature. Apparently infrastructure investment doesn't exist unless like basically everyone acts together. The federal government, the states, the locals, and privates. It seems like every good project has a little bit of everybody, right? Which to a 2AC is like, thank you very much for, the ultimate permutation cards, right? Because I'll just read, all actors acting together best, solves your issue, et cetera, et cetera. So, make sure to have that sort of defense of your framework. Yeah, definitely avoid jargon and avoid the term abuse. That's again another one of my pet peeves or whatever. Arguments in debate don't abuse you, right? They may create a competitive, inequitable situation, right? They may create a fairness question. They may skew, so that one side wins over the other, right? But unless they're like rhetorically abusing you, they're saying things like, they're clubbing you like baby harp seals, or they put you in the debate Cuisinart and press puree, or unless they're saying those kind of things in their speeches, or they're actually, coming across the physicality line a little too much or something, right? That's abuse. What happens in terms of those arguments, right? You can say there are in-round implications. And let me get on that soapbox for a second. I've always thought, there are two of the greatest Jedi mind tricks in the history of theory debates are vote against the argument, not the team. Okay, that's one of the greatest Jedi mind tricks in the world. Okay, because it allows a team to be conditional, or an argument to be conditional, even when it wasn't intended to, or when that's the whole point of the debate. Right? I always love that. People are like, conditional counterplan. Somebody's like, oh, conditionality bad. And the other team's like, oh, vote against the argument, not the team. Yeah, so they want the argument to go away. That was the whole point of conditionality in the first place. It's like, yeah, that's awesome. Right? That's I got my conditionality both ways. Right? That's right. That's one of the best shell games or Jedi mind tricks in theory debates. And the other one is the potential for abuse versus in-round abuse. Right? Because whatever you're not, that's the important one. Right? If you show in-round abuse, they're like, oh, well then it's all about potential. Right? And if you show potential, then they're all like, oh, it's about like what we did now. Right? But in-round abuse, the reason it's the greatest shell game in the world is in-round abuse is the most manipulated thing possible. Right? If you truly want to go for theory, right, and you truly want to create in-round abuse, then you can create a negative strategy that walks the other team into, right, making those arguments. Right? You read a dis ad that you know they're going to say no link to. Right? So you can say in-round abuse, no link to my dis ad. See? Told you, right? Or, if you're going to read, like, you're making an argument about extra topicality or whatever, right? And so you read a counterplan and they say, permutation is part of the plan. And you're like, oh, proves it, right? In-round abuse, okay? that is the most manipulated thing possible in a theory debate, right? Is you can always put parts of your strategy, right, that walk the team into, making those arguments, right? And so, make sure. Impact your arguments, and then, think about, we talked a little bit about this, about where the impacts come from, but people are so cavalier and often forget, the impact part of the theory argument, and that really is like the most important part, right? Because you're saying, look, they violated the rule, right? And so you got to ask that question: what does it mean for you or your opponent to win this argument? And then the other thing I think that's important is think about the real world analogies, right? What would Congress do if somebody in Congress, brought this kind of proposal or policy, right? What would the court do if somebody brought that kind of proposal or policy, right? The reason why it's so easy to win on plan flaws, is because there's so many cool examples. There's examples where the court has struck plans down because they didn't have a period. It's my favorite plan flaw, right? The affirmative doesn't have a period at the end of their plan, right? That's the ultimate in conditionality, right? Clearly, they could add more. They could add more to the end of that plan. Right? Then you read little cards, say the court struck down, plans without, or, policies without period. Right? Because in legal jargon, right, that allows for, an expansion. Right? Or, those things, right? And so, think about those, because judges are going to be more likely to pull that trigger when they're like, oh yeah, that's what a court would do. Right? That's what a Congress would do. Right? Especially when you're trying to say a reason why the team should lose. Right? That's a big issue. Right? There are a lot of judges, the majority of judges would much prefer to just let an argument go away if you win a theory argument. If you win, counterplan's illegitimate, right? The majority of judges would much prefer to just say, okay, I don't evaluate the counterplan. Does the negative have a strategy left in the debate that can win them the debate? If yes, I can still vote for the negative. If not, I'm going to vote for the affirmative. Right? Most judges are, it takes a little bit to cross over that, that hurdle, right? And so you got to add a little finesse to why they should lose. Things like damage has been done. Things like you make strategic decisions in the 2AC. Things like, right, my best option would have been to read multiple new asks, but, the debate community hasn't progressed that far yet, and, those kind of things. Okay? We already talked about rejecting the argument, not the team. And that's not true. That's not like every time somebody says reject the argument, not the team, that they're trying to play a shell game. But with certain arguments, it is just a backdoor way of getting exactly what you wanted it to be. And then, like I was saying before, at the bottom, always ask for reciprocal theory. Here's one of my favorite runs. Right? Affirmatives have become very cavalier these days with their non-intrinsicness arguments against disadvantages. Right? Especially against politics and those kind of things. It's like, oh, non-intrinsic, a rational actor would, vote for the plan and against the politics DA at the same time, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? And then, that's justified because rational actor and it's, similar to a permutation or similar to an advantage counterplan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Well, I always wish that the negative side in that instance would respond to that intrinsicness argument against the dissent with a series of intrinsicness arguments against the affirmative's advantage, right? And say rational actor, would never take this action when, there are all these other things in the SQO or whatever that could solve an advantage, and you just rattle off, and then all of a sudden you vote neg on presumption. Because everybody solved everything. There's no, there's no impact, left in the debate, right? That's a reciprocal. If the affirmative is allowed, to make that theory claim, well, then the negative, should be allowed that same thing, right? We talked about the examples, with some counterplans and some advocacies. All right. Before we take our first, or before we take a break, I just wanted to, one of the things, and this should be something you talk about in your theory groups and in your labs and with your teams back home and those things is, there's a lot of theory issues, but there really are a small number that judges actually vote for, and that you can actually win debates on. And I'm not even sure that people vote on all these things, right? In fact, I think the list may even be smaller. And I think that's worth, sort of the discussion of, what actually are people willing to pull the trigger on, right? Because it really comes down to what value do you have to insult in order for somebody to take offense, right? And a lot of times it's the value of, is it a good role play about the game? Is it allowed to remain educational? Is it allowed to be competitively equitable, right? What does it do for the role of evidence, right? It's usually one of those values that you're, that's the button you're pushing, and these are the ones that push those buttons more than others, right? Obviously, framework, multiple conditional frameworks, which, I think is, again, one of the more underutilized. No solvency advocate seems to really be taking on some legs here in the last couple of years, especially against counterplans. I think people are starting to hold the negative to at least you have to have a card. Conditionality bad sometimes. Again, I think that's now becoming kind of a hard hurdle to overcome. I think you got, again, I think it's more when the reason people vote on conditionality bad usually is like sheer numbers. 3, 4 counterplans all of a sudden gets a little excessive, or it's more of a multiple conditional frameworks is really what they're are in most of those kind of situations. The conditional or the dispositional pig. Sometimes pig's bad, but really not very often. I had somebody, Kevin Hamrick of MBA, was joking with me only when it's dropped. People only vote on pig's bad anymore when it's dropped. But I have seen dispositional, especially dispositional pig's bad, or conditional pig's bad, because then you can't even straight determine. 50-state fiat. This is one. Do the judge philosophy search on this one. There are quite a few judges out there that take some umbrage against the 50-state fiat. And that's kind of one I think be selective on. International fiat. That's again a big one. Private actor. I think this year in particular. A private company can't go seize our road and build it. I mean, they just can't, right? I don't care how, Sinicola and Sons, you see their big old machinery or whatever, right? They can't just like all of a sudden, drive up to a certain area and say, we're fixing this road. We're Sinicola and Sons, right? We're road fixers, okay? Right? They can't do that, right? They got to get permission and all those things, right? And so when people try to do, I think, and again, there's also a lot of these, especially with the fiat questions. It's how people claim their counterplan is going to come into being that's going to create a fiat issue, right? There are ways of getting around this. That's why I was saying no to normal means kind of thing. Intrinsic arguments versus disadds. Object fiat's where you fiat away. The half's got an Indo-Pak war, and you fiat away India and Pakistan fight a war and so on. That sort of thing. Consult counterplans and condition counterplans. This is another one. Boy, do the judge philosophy searches. People don't like the consult counterplan as much as they used to. There's some really good arguments, to be had there. I think there's one. Nope.
All right. Let us take a 5-minute break. Short but sweet and fabulous, since we got sleep till late anyway. So 5-minute break. Yeah, move around. By the way, some of you are playing Tetris. I can tell by your hand movements and your eye movements. And so you might want to reflect on it like that. Your parents didn't get for you to go to
Hey, ballsy friend.
No,